Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of think, because Alessia and I chatted quite a bit earlier this week, one-to-one about rollbacks, and this is so tied in. So Myra, when we were chatting one-to-one about the post-deployment migrations and next steps, it was like, let's just come together and work out. So rough thing that we kind of need to decide is, the immediate thing to decide is, what are the next steps for rollbacks around post-deployment migrations? But if we can decide on where we want to like head in the future, then hopefully that stuff comes together. So that was kind of my sort of intentions behind this sync. Yes, thanks for putting all the stuff in the agenda, Myra. So based on what we have currently, we have option A and option D, I'll call it. It's the A plus C option mentioned. So do you want to run through all the stuff you've got in the agenda, Myra? Like, or do you want to just discuss, like have that as read-only? Your choice.
Yeah, I can run through it kind of quickly. So the option A basically suggests the automatic execution of post-deployment migrations. And after discussing with several people on the issue, it seems that it is going to be problematic for the reasons that I laid out on the document. Mainly because we don't really know the execution times of the post-deployment migrations. There is some uncertainty, and we also don't know what kind of operations are they going to execute. And we also have other details about the long execution of large indexes that are going to block production, the manual production deployment against the automatic creation of the post-deployment migrations. So it doesn't really sound like the time to automate this task. Instead, it seems that we really need to exert control over the post-deployment migrations. And that is when option B comes around, which is basically the combination of option A, removing the post-deployment migrations from the coordinated pipeline, and option C, which is executing post-deployment migrations in a specific cadence. And the post-deployment migrations, I think this is a very long-term end goal. Like we were talking with Amy about, this is kind of the holy grail for post-deployment migrations. And I think the execution should be based on the content of the post-deployment migrations. And I also put some examples, like for example, a large indexes or long foreign keys, they should be created like in low traffic or even in the weekends, or we can set a schedule based on that. Data migrations, for example, that are not critical or that are smart, short, they could be executed daily, and also like adding columns, removing columns, they can also be executed daily. But we really need to identify and signal the content of post-deployment migration so we can pick and schedule based on that. And as I said, I think this is something that we can achieve, but it is a long-term effort. I visualize, I don't know, I don't want to be positive or something, or negative, but probably a couple of quarters into this. I don't think this is something that we can achieve within a month, so to speak. And well, I think I am thinking it at least 2 iterations for this. There can be more, there probably are going to be more, but at least I can identify 2. The first one is to basically option A, removing the post-deploy migration from the coordinated pipeline, but execute that post-deploy job in a manual way instead of an automatic way. So the execution would be at the discretion of the release managers, because it would basically depend also on the release schedule and also on the GitLab.com availability. And then option iteration 2, or it would be to make the execution of the post-deploy migration smarter, so we can signal the nature of the post-deploy migration, fit and schedule to execute it, and we'll basically execute it. And I think once we have that data and once we know how this process works, we should be able to remove the manual overhead from the release managers and probably automate this process. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Cool, thanks for going through that.
So thank you, Myra. I came to this meeting with a mindset of discussing some specific thing related to rollbacks, but then my attention got distracted by reference of your issue into another one, which I linked at the very bottom of this agenda, which so I was reading this Camille comments, and this kind of opened my mind. And one of the options that we kind of disregarded at the beginning, which is not using post-deployment migration at all. So I don't care about the details of that who specific thing. It's out of scope for what we are doing, but there's a point in what Camille is saying, which is very on top of everything, which is we should focus on what the framework offers and avoid monkey patching and creating stuff on top of that. Post-deployment migration are a trick built on top of the framework because they are not supported. So if we have to think about long-term, I would like to think about long-term without post-deployment migration and rethinking not really user, but administrative control, because there are plenty of web software around that don't have post-deployment migration. I mean, they don't have how we implemented them, right? So it was kind of a trick for giving this for monthly releases so that we can basically we have a synchronization point after the installation completes so that we can run post-deployment migration when everything else is upgraded. But there is a point which there is a pattern that I've seen in other web software, which is running post-deployment migration through the admin panel. So in the admin panel, you have a kind of a warning, a notice, a list of things requiring your, let's say, as an administrator, your immediate action, or you have to just pay attention to them. Oftentimes, these are running indexes, restructuring post-deployment migrations, and things like that. Probably, we reached the level of maturity where we should think about that type of interface instead of this post-deployment thing. Then we can still have an API call for running them, right? So in the end, we can still have, for customer who wants packages that at the end, they just call the API, but this kind of removes the things because there's no longer expectation for the migration to run immediately after or at any point. They just are there and the admin should run them. So this is the thing that kind of sidetracked my thought on the topic. Now back on the, do anyone want to say something about this before I move to something?
So we don't lose the thought, what was the one thing that you wanted to come in here with about rollbacks?
Yeah, that's the thing that I was going to start right now.
Okay,
so this is the thing that happened and it kind of sidetracked completely.
Yeah, just before that, I think, yes, definitely post-deployment migrations are tricky, and a future without them, I think it will be brighter than the one we have now. I think this proposal of try to make the execution smarter will get us closer to execute like even long batches.
Yeah,
example,
same problem.
Executing them like one
background migration, things like that. All in the UI, all under control of the administrator.
Yeah, but I think that would probably solve the problem for self-managed, but for GitLab.com, we will still need to execute them before including them in a release, right?
This is something that was in the conversation that I wanted to start, which is very much more closer. But yeah, you're right. So please go ahead. That's a real problem.
Yeah, something to consider that it will be lovely to have a button in the administrative tool that, okay, run it now, that would be great. But I think we need to think about how to remove the complexity. I think the long-term goal will be to think about how to remove the complexity for both GitLab.com and for self-manage and try to find a solution that fits nicely for both of them.
One thing I do want to just mention that we should keep in mind is a lot of these things we're talking about, we sort of talk about different types of migration. We should keep in mind whether the first step is just to work out what types we have and frequency and how long do they tend to run, because it might be that some of them are easy to solve, other, like, you know, we may have one that only runs once a month, easy, we can just deal with that, versus one that's, you know, 3 times a day type of thing. So it might be that before we actually make a firm decision, we want to just find out those numbers.
Yeah, I agree here. So the thing that I want to actually discuss in this call is exactly the impact that doing something like this, so option A, either iteration B or iteration 1 or option D or option A, which is the same thing, is the impact on release management.
So that's kind of what on point 2 of this agenda, like absolutely, like let's make sure we think about what, so jumping, Alessia, keep going.
Yeah, so because we did option point 1 red, right? So Myra was reading through it, so we are there. So my point here is that because now we are working on this metric for showing pending migrations, which is in review. So, but there is a missing information here, which is package to migration. So let me try to explain this with an example. So we have several things that are moving independently when we release. We can tag, we can deploy, we can do certain things, then we can run the post-deployment migration. And we may be willing to roll back at a certain point, right? So right now we have the easy information, which is a package is not roll backable because it includes post-deployment migration compared to the previous one. Mm-hmm. So this is a simple check. Then we know that many of those post-deployment migration maybe are rollbackable, but we just say there are cases where this can't be rolled back. So we don't roll back. That's what we have, right? If we remove running post-deployment migration, we may start thinking that we can always roll back up until the last time we run the post-deployment migration. But then there's a missing information, which is when we run those post-deployment migration, from which package are they originating from? Because this is the point in time where we cannot longer roll back. So maybe we can roll back 5 packages before hitting the one that actually has those post-deployment migration. And we are blind here. We don't have this information at the moment. It's Git, so it's in there. Once we have the list of file, we can get out that information, but we don't have right now. And then this kinds of doubles up in terms of releasing. Because when we want to cut the stable branches, we have to check if we run post-deployment migration. But I'm trying to figure out if there are some weird situation where basically, so I'm trying to think if there is a situation where we are kind of getting ahead with the package, but we want to create a stable branch from something that was deployed earlier, or even if we want to give a time frame in which we want to make sure that those migrations are actually run. Because right now we are not doing this. So we just assume that they are run and that's fine. But maybe because we pack all of them, it takes longer to run, or we may not see side effects of those migration and maybe we're rushing this close to the 20th because you say, oh, it's the 20th. We want to pick a stable branch. So let's run post-deployment migration. And maybe something that could have been spot 1 day ahead of time. It really depends on how often we run them, right? But let's say 1 head ahead of time, then it will kind of slip into let's say the RC42, and then we have to figure out if this was related. So it makes it harder to think about what's in the release, which is why my first attempt to tackle this was very rigid, and it was, you can't merge it. So it's easier, right? Because it's not in the package. Not only we didn't write, it's not in the package at all. So you can't have this doubt if it's included, but it wasn't run or things like that. So this is basically the thing that we need to figure out. And because I don't want that I would like to avoid going into a state where what we built in terms of confidence for the rollbacks, we kind of it goes away because we have this uncertainty around post-deployment migration. So we should probably try to think a couple of scenarios and building some timelines, because I mean it's a matter of having a timeline and thinking if things can get past the point or not, right? So, but we haven't done this. Because we were more focusing on the social aspect, on how to change this and making this so that it's kind of developer friendly, more friendly than just say you can't merge that thing or you have to split your merge requests. But basically, because we are doing this, making it easier for them, we are making it harder for us. So we need to, we can shoulder the extra complexity, but we need to make sure that we thought about it. So that's my point.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with about the complexity that this adds to release managers, because we need to know, we need to have visibility about if we have pending post-deployment migrations and the type of them, right? We need to know if we are going to execute a background, if we are going to create an index to a high traffic table or an index to a regular table that it shouldn't take that much. And we really need to have that information somewhere, whether it's a Slack command or a Grafana dashboard, like a post-deployment migration pressure. We need to have that information something, because that will allow us to take a decision on them. And when it comes to piling up those, for starters, we will, I think, and I'm speaking for experience, that we have around 5 packages a day, I think. From experience, I would say that
5.
at least one of those packages has a single post-deployment migration. So we should ensure that this job is executed at least once a day, so the cadence doesn't vary much from what we have now to what we could have.
I have fresher data points for you. Yes, we talk 5 packages, but we tend to promote only 3.
Okay, so one, I guess we could say, and I'm speaking this from experience.
Just something that discovered today, looking at last couple of days of promotion data, but that's just.
Yeah, awesome. But one on those 3 packages might have a post-deployment migration, right?
Sure.
And those can be executed in EMEA or in AMER. So we will need to make sure that this independent job is executed at least once a day. So it's not that different from the execution that we have today. And I forgot what I was gonna say, but yeah. Visibility, execute the post-deployment migrations once a day.
I'm sorry, my fault, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Sometimes I really should.
No, definitely lay the blame. So just to step back a little bit before we go into this, like, what do we, in terms of because it sounds like the trickiest part of all of this is going to be the kind of maybe the short term, right? The first iteration before we have tooling and things. So in terms of like the long term, are we aiming for having no post-deployment migrations, or are we aiming for them running on their own independent schedule based on the type of migration? Are we going for D, or should we look more into the E option of like they don't exist? Or is there some combo where certain types of migration don't exist and others do run on a schedule? I don't know.
Were you asking long term or short term? Sorry.
Long term.
Long term, okay.
I think it might change the answer to the short term, right?
Yeah.
What's the ideal? Like, the ideal would be none, right?
The ideal would be none.
Yeah. What we were discussing at the beginning. So if we have to run something, we push it into the product, into the admin aspect of the product. And so, yeah. It should not be a deployment problem. It's some kind of a maintenance. Sorry, Mary.
Even if we push, even if we push it to the product, for GitLab.com, it would be a deployment problem because we need to execute them before including them in a release.
Yeah, but if I do agree, but before we push it to the product, which means that we classified and identified types of migrations. So long term, we already identified if some of these are of a certain problem. I kind of expect that most of them will be some kind of cleanup state. So cleaning up means that we just waited a long time to make sure that the version bumpings and things like that don't mess up with this. So it's kind of removing columns so we can run them. There's no problem. And the other one is background migrations. Top of my head, maybe there are others. So I'm just thinking index creation, background migration, things like that. So if they are part of the product, I'm expecting that we will have administrative API around this one. So we can kind of, it will go back to be our problem, but it's a well-defined problem. It is no longer this black box where things happen, takes 8 hours, 10 hours. We don't even know what is happening inside. And if you go down the route of defining this at the product level, there's no longer this post-deployment migration failed to run, but you have single units of work. So maybe you have to think about, can I reschedule this? What does it mean if this failed? It really forces you to push through the definition of what is this type of job. And so you have to think about also failure in the product and not just I run post-deployment migration, they crashed. But this is super long-term.
So the reason I'm asking this though is I think, so what we're talking about with this kind of midterm solution of pulling them out, a lot of the challenge is going to be around the scheduling and the visibility. So like the big challenge I see of separating these out of the pipeline as we have today is, should I mention in 2D? So we have the whole point that Alessio was just making about how far back can we roll back to? But we're also going to have a lot of visibility that we need around incidents, because whilst these things are running, if we have an incident, it's not going to be so clear to link like, oh, this job is running versus what we currently have. So we will, if we do this short term and just pull them out, we're going to need to do some work around visibility. It might be worth thinking about whether that is like whether that's the right first step if our long term is quite a different solution.
But this is why we were thinking about running them manually and not on schedule. So the release manager has to be around and knows if if there is an incident, he knows that it triggered the post-deployment migration.
Yeah, depending on the post-deployment migration, this might be part of another discussion, but if we start classifying them and we start knowing what are they doing, we might be able to roll back, even if it is a post-deployment migration. But
sure.
Right now,
I do
we
agree.
don't really have that information. And when it comes to the long term, I like the idea of removing them. I just see a lot of, I don't see how yet. I think classifying them and executing them in a specific schedule based on their content will get us closer to it. Moving the part of the product is a nice idea, but that seems like very, very far away right now.
You're right. I just want to give you a quick example for a possible idea for rolling back stuff. So removing column is impossible. There's no way around that because you have to ignore, if you want to roll back, you have to ignore them. So that's impossible. And but it's kind of uncommon. I think that one of the biggest problems we have with rollbacks are background jobs. Because when you roll back, you're removing the class, the worker that is implementing the operation, but the data is still on Redis. So Redis is trying to crank to get out the jobs and then can't create the class because it's not there. So this is kind of an easy thing to solve, right? Because you can write a Redis middleware to try to figure out if something like this is happening and just stop processing those queues. I mean, this is just a very high level thought about this, but it's absolutely doable. Even just having some kind of feature flag things around them, so you can kind of have an admin in control where you say, I want to stop processing this type of jobs. So you're going to roll back to stop the thing, and they will just sit there in Redis. I mean, we can think about, but the point is that we first need to figure out why we are using post-deployment migration.
Yeah. Returning to the background migrations point, we have the steal method that allows us to steal them and remove them from the queue. And when we want to roll back, and it is a bit more complex, background migrations are super complex, and this might be part of another discussion, but if we want to roll back and we have a short-lived background migration, if this one already finished, we can roll back because there is no pending jobs, and the code should be independent from the application code.
That's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. It really depends why you're using background migration.
We normally use them to migrate data.
Yeah, but if you are destructively migrating data and you're rolling back, you lost the data. I mean, it's still there because it's in the database, but the application can't read it because it's expecting to find it in another place.
Okay. Yeah, I see the edge cases.
That's one of the reasons why we have these things, right? Because we released monthly, so you can just, instead of splitting this type of operation over 2 milestones, you can do it in one. Because you can do, if the database has this column, if this column is value, then read from here, otherwise go there. But this is kind of a wrapper code that you have around accessors on columns and things like that then you remove on the next release. But if you go back with code only, you're screwed, because if you process something and you remove information from the database.
Yeah, but that is the case when you process something and you remove information, but there might be a case in which you're also processing something and you're adding data, and that should be fine. So it really depends on the background migration, and we really need to classify them and to understand what they are doing, because we don't know.
I do agree.
Okay, so in terms of rollbacks, then
this is complex.
Yeah, this is complex. So okay, so we're saying that we want to split these out and have them run manually, and we'll assume it will be once a day, and the release manager would organize that. Okay, so
how do we know if we can roll back? Maybe we should store somewhere the last package we run post-deployment migration, and extra information here. So the first, let's say, first step, very easy, not very, say, not complete, but is that when we run post-deployment migration, we store somewhere the package SHA. So we know that we can roll back up until that point. This is not entirely correct, because maybe that package has no new post-deployment migration. They were just coming from the previous one. Just an example, right? So we are stopping the window of a rollback, but maybe we could go extra package back. We don't know. So maybe second step we can do, we should try to identify the source of those background migrations.
Yeah, we need to know when they were introduced.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So for now, if we did that, that gains us quite a lot in rollbacks, right? So not always, it's going to depend a bit on luck, but hopefully you would be able to roll back 4, maybe 5 packages if needed, which is going to be way better than our probable one right now, right? So is that enough for now on rollbacks, or do we want other things that we would need to solve in order to, I guess, unlock more rollback options?
I think for rollback, this could be enough. We gain not only the things that you mentioned, Amy, we also gain another extra benefit, which is that if we didn't run post-deployment migration, every package is rollbackable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So yeah, I'm assuming that we'll run this once a day as required. Like, you know, I'm assuming there'll be something each day, but maybe not. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, but no, my point is that compare the same package with a post-deployment migration inside, compare it to today, it is rollbackable at the end of the deployment because the post-deployment migration are detached. So if you didn't run them, then if you have an incident, usually it often happens right after the deployment, right? It can happen also on peak traffic, whatever, right? But oftentimes it happened close to the deployment itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Okay, so that I think is good enough probably for what we need for rollbacks, right? Is some visibility so we can make this check. What do we need to do then for the monthly release? Because that's the other big one, right? Is this making sure we run the required migrations in time to see if things are stable. We'll have all kinds of horrible complexity as well, like what happens if we like lock a branch and end up cherry picking a thing in. We need to work through all of those kind of up close tagging scenarios.
Yeah, maybe we can start easy and just work this through the template. When we say something like, this is the day you select a branch, then when you promote, you make sure that we run you kind of know that when you try to commit to something. So you say, this is the thing that I want to promote to RC42. So I will not promote other packages for today unless it's needed. And they just make sure that that thing goes to production, that post-deployment migration are run, that a reasonable amount of time is passed by when I run the thing, so that major problem got spot, and I don't focus on promoting the next package.
Yeah, for now, I think it would be very manual. We will have the tooling, but we will need to rearrange the monthly template to mention this and to include the execution of the post-deploy job.
Yeah, okay, I think that could work certainly in the short term. Like I actually, from chatting with Ruben a bit, I think we're almost causing problems by the fact we deploy so frequently that we end up tagging something really close to the 22nd, because the release post is created on the 18th. And quite often we've done a lot of deploys after that. And that's one of the reasons why Ruben wanted to create this check, the release check chat-ups command. So actually, I don't think we are causing other people problems by pulling back here's the date which we think we pick a package, and then having a day following that where we make sure we've run all the post-deployment migrations and check for stability. What would be the long term on scaling that? Would we manage to scale that out by doing the classification work, or is there something else we need to do to scale that?
Do you mean scale the post-deployment migration?
Yeah, just so I'm thinking like what would it's, I mean, it's not going to be ideal to need to have a day and the month where we just have to focus on running these manually versus doing regular sort of deployments to .com. So is there a like what would be our kind of way of eliminating that? Like how would it be like we get them in the product and we run them and sort of change the schedule, or would we need to think of another solution to be able to run these, to be able to know we've run all the required post-deployment migrations and have time for stability checks?
Yeah, I think once we have classified them and once we have set a schedule for them based on their content, that could bring us closer to see if they can be a good fit for the product. And that would bring us closer to probably remove them. And yeah, to probably remove them and probably replace them or move them even to regular migrations, or to the ones we can do it or the ones we cannot, include them in the product and trigger them from there.
Yeah, I agree with Myra. Just wanted to remark that basically post-deployment migration help us to do something a bit quicker, but you can split that work over a longer period of time and have it, and it will work as well. And for GitLab.com, the longer period of time is just consecutive deployments of a day. But because we have customers running on monthly releases, this means months. That's the biggest problem here, right? The difference between months and so with this, I mean, this is what we have. So the problem that I see right now is that post-deployment migration is a catch-all solution for several type of problems, and there's no really they only have one key aspect, which is they run after. So now we need to say grown up as an engineering department and figure out why we need to run something after, and classify and also figure out if some of this have other problems, like the thing we were discussing before with Myra, like the destructive migrations and things like that. Because again, destructive migration is a bad implementation of something, because you can do this over several milestones when you just do non-destructive migration and then you destruct later on, right? So you get the benefits now and then you just do the cleanup after. So it's just a matter of reinforcing those ideas that we need to check for this type of things when we review, when we code, obviously, but as well when something gets reviewed, we have to think about this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, that fits well, because what I know that makes it harder, sort of longer term, to roll out, but at the same time, I do think that we shouldn't place the entire burden of this change on the release managers. Like, this is a great opportunity. Like, short term, for sure, we can do it to unblock ourselves, but longer term, I think having something that changes the way we think about these things is actually going to be, it gets us to the next step, right? So that makes sense. So rough summary is we're saying that the ideal end solution is option E, no deployments, right? To get there, we are going to first do option A. Well, no, modified, right? So first step of option E is going to be the splitting out the post-deployment job and making up manual as is, so all the jobs in there at the moment. Release managers to run that on a manual schedule, recommended once a day. We store that, we do the work to store that somewhere to unblock the rollbacks. And we modify our release like prep timeline to add in enough time to make sure we've definitely run this and allowed it to bake on .com for enough time before tagging, so we're sure of stability. And then we do the classification. Yeah, and then we work out what happens next.
Yeah,
I think classification can be offloaded to database team. At least seeding that problem, so we can start in parallel. Yeah, they've offered to do that, so that's good.
Yeah, I try to summarize that at the end of the document. Like, we are clear, at least I am clear in the first two iterations, and the iteration C or iteration 3 is the one that is still kind of darkish. I know that we will have way more data once we have gone through this iteration, right? But there might be a chance once we have all of this implemented that we could decide, like, hey, we now know more about the post-deployment migrations. There might be a chance of us removing them and replacing them with something in the product.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. If we got these in the product, if it was an admin type of thing, particularly for the background migrations, would that mean that we could remove the person that actually needs to or not remove, but change the person that needs to execute these, and it could actually be the stage group teams themselves? Would it still need to be release managers?
I think the biggest problem is access control. So if I had to do this just for customers, so not for running GitLab.com, so thinking about customer that installs this on premise, I would say it's an administrative task, so you need to be an admin. If I'm thinking how we operate, I would probably define an extra role, which then fits to delivery team members, where you can run this, and maybe we can give visibility to others, because I really don't know, right? I really don't know, because it's too early to understand why. I mean, if it's just queuing jobs, they should probably just be queued by themselves and having a smart mechanism that can stop them if we roll back. And so it's just a matter of checking the status. If it's running migration, like creating indexes or things that are supposed to be taking a long time, then I'm kind of expecting an admin of some sort that can run this, and we could be that admin, right? So if we then want to give us admin access to GitLab.com because of customer data, fine. Then we define a kind of maintainer role, that someone that can run those things without changing other settings.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I like that idea. Basically, we allow people to schedule to schedule a background migration, and then the release manager or the maintainer will be the one that pushes the button. Okay, like I'm going to execute them. So that's nice.
Awesome. Okay, great. Is there any other stuff we need to go through? Do these notes at the bottom, Myra, give you enough for kind of, there's going to obviously be lots of decide going on in the future, but does this give you enough for this, for like, I guess, wrapping up this issue for now, and we can have like discussions on the future iterations as needed in the future?
Yeah. So I'm gonna draw my conclusion in the issue and just to wrap up that discussion. And then I was gonna ask, should I open up an epic that says with the objective of removing post-deployment migrations and then another epic per iteration, or should I just open one epic for iteration A?
That would be my preference.
Okay.
Just so that and put them on release velocity, just so that it's a little bit less admin work if they're not nested too deep.
Okay.
So we can call them, it doesn't necessarily have to be iteration like one. You could literally call it the epic, like, more or less what you've got your issue. So like removing, like separating post-deployment migrations off the auto-deploy pipeline could be an epic, and we could have a second one where we like do the scheduling. Although I think the database team might do quite a lot of iteration 2 for us.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. And then for that, having that as an epic, Alessio, for the rollbacks one, are you happy that we use that epic to just kind of be the enabler for assisted rollbacks? And on the assisted rollback epic, we can just literally like say, once we have this other epic completed, here's where we go next. Yeah,
let's do this. I mean, there will be some kind of something that we can mark as a blocker from the other epic, which is kind of the last one, and then we say we move on.
Awesome.
I have to drop off because someone rang my doorbell. Sorry, I think that we are at the end. So thank you.
Really done. Great. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
So just an idea that just came to my head. Being able to remove the post-deploy job from the coordinated pipeline will bring us closer to the assisted deployments epic, right? That the ones that proposes to automate the production deployments, right?
Yeah, awesome. I think that's right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's why I think this first step, Alessio mentioned about like actually getting it so that the check can know, when did we run this? Is it safe to go back? Because then, we can just feed all that into the automation. So yeah, I do think it gets us closer. So that's a great aim.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Okay. What do you want to do as the next steps?
I'm gonna go again to the document that I sent you with the conclusion. Make sure that we are also mentioning that doing these iterations could lead us to, at some point, remove the post-deployment migrations. I'm probably going to post the comment on Monday. Yeah, and then I will also open up an epic for iteration A, and I'm going to create issues for at least the steps that we have recognized so far. And yeah, we can take it from there. I'm excited.
Cool. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. It might be worth have a think about whether you want to update the issue description to bring in option D, as you've got it kind of outlined already, and then add option E, because then we can kind of we'll leave that issue being the kind of full picture, and then we can just add a thing afterwards where it's like, okay, at the moment, based on everything we know, we'll go with this option, and you saves everyone having to read all the comments.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Awesome, nice. And in terms of issues, feel free to keep most of them like pretty high level for now. Like I think there's just the two that we really need to work through, which is the well, three maybe. It's the tracking it for the rollbacks, doing the actual moving off the auto deploy pipeline, and then making sure the monthly release includes that timing. But I think as long as we know what we're doing for those three pieces, we can work out the future steps afterwards.
Yeah, I think another important one is the visibility one. Like we need to have the tooling around the pending post-deploy migration, which is something that Alessio is already working on, but we just also need to consider that one.
Yes, makes sense. Yeah. Yes, I mean, have a think as well. I mean, we don't have to decide now, but have a think as well about whether we'll need to do any additional QA runs after running these migrations. We'll certainly want to have something going in the release issue as well, but it might be worth bringing over some of the extra pieces from our auto deploy pipeline onto this job as well.
Yeah, good point. We probably should, but yeah, I will put it on the issue and also consider
yeah,
that.
we can add those bits as tasks. Okay, fantastic. Give me a shout if you want. I don't mind if you want to update on the doc, and then we like if you want me to help there, or if you want to go ahead on the issue, go for it there. That's fine.
Yeah, for sure. I will ping you before posting my comment.
Fantastic. All right. I might do a little bit of an edit of this agenda and try and get it to match a little bit more with our conversation. Just do a bit of reordering. I think we pretty much covered everything. One thing actually we didn't talk about is the development process, but I think maybe we're not going to do it. We're not going to make any changes to that for now, right? So
yeah, that's correct. It will be the same for them. It should be transparent for developers, at least for this iteration.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, that's a great one. So maybe once we've got to the point where we have a conclusion kind of shared on the issue, then we can add that into things like engineering week in review and stuff. And then if anyone violently disagrees, they've got some time to kind of shout, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, perfect. Thanks very much for putting all this together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the nice discussion.
Nice. Yes, thank you. Speak to you soon.
All right. Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye.